too.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And as always, it's an honor to be able to enter into debate in this place to touch on some of the very, very serious issues that are affecting, and in this case, not just my constituents, not just Canadians from coast to coast to coast, but truly speaks to Canada's role in the world. So, Madam Speaker, Bill S-8, an act to amend the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act to make consequential amendments to other acts and to amend the Immigration and Refugee Protection Regulations, speaks to a gap that has been highlighted. Specifically, and I'd like to explore a little bit as to why this is being brought forward now, but speaks to a gap that exists, where there are examples in Canada where those who have been complicit, profited from, or in some cases may have even been involved in some of the most heinous crimes globally. Whether that's with revolution, regime changes, have not specifically been sanctioned in many cases, but were a part of a regime that had faced, had participated in massive human rights violations. And specifically, I'll get to some of those examples when it comes to Iran. However, we see that there is a gap, that there is currently nothing that says when somebody could come to this country, apply for status, permanent resident status, maybe even citizenship. Their application will be judged based on the merits of that application, when it's quite possible that that individual may have been complicit, as I mentioned, in very, very serious and heinous crimes. So what this legislation purports to do, and I'll get into some of the challenges and how it does take a baby step in the right direction, although there seems to be as much ambiguity being added to the process as there is an attempt to address some of the challenges that exist. It helps to ensure that that can't happen. Now, Madam Speaker, I think it bears mentioning that this is something that, quite frankly, is long overdue. Some of these loopholes that have allowed these perpetrators of human rights violations to come to Canada, and the fact that these gaps may exist, the changes are long overdue. So what took 8 years for that to take place? Well, as we know, Madam Speaker, we see a global security challenge that has shaken the very foundations of what we all came to take for granted, and specifically, as I'm sure you know, Madam Speaker, that is the conflict, the Russian aggression against the state of Ukraine. And all of a sudden, there was, although certainly there have been many conflicts, including many that have risen to the point where sanctions have had to be applied, you see how this conflict brought in a whole barrage of sanctions against Russians and those who are sympathetic or involved in the activities of a country that is devastating the state and, of course, the impacts upon the people of Ukraine. So the fact that there would be this loophole that actors who may be complicit from or profit from, but not specifically mentioned, and that I think is a key point here, not specifically mentioned, would be granted the possibility of coming to Canada to be given safe haven. Now, there is, in the expert testimony that was heard before the Senate committee, and as we've heard from stakeholders on this subject, there is some ambiguity that exists about what exactly this will allow the government to do versus what it is being said to do. And I would just highlight in that it was long overdue to see these loopholes fixed, but it is in typical fashion that we have a government that would propose a bill, and in this case going through the Senate, where they are admirable in their intentions. They get an A for the announcement. But, Madam Speaker, when it comes to the delivery and the implications of what is actually being proposed, there remain many outstanding questions. And I think that is a troubling trend that we have seen across a host of issues that this government over the last 8 years has been really good at the politics of it. However, they fail in the actual hard work of governing. And Madam Speaker, that's truly what is key when it comes to so many things that we face in our country. It takes hard work. It's not just about announcements. It's easy to stand up in front of a podium and make an announcement. it's a whole lot harder to actually get down and get the work. And Madam Speaker, as a farmer, I can tell you that if you simply thought about and talked about your planting season, you certainly won't be successful when it comes to the work that is required to put the seed in the ground, the work to make sure that it can come to the point where you would harvest in the fall, and then of course everything associated with that. So I would highlight how it's and it's the same thing with vineyards. My colleague here what is a burgeoning wine sector in the Peterborough area, and it's very exciting, and I know I've had some chats with that, and I think the chair of the Wine Caucus as well, I would mention as well, Madam Speaker, through you, of course. And I would take this opportunity, actually, since my colleague is here talking about one of his passions. It was a pleasure for me, and I believe with unanimous support, see Bill C-281 passed here just this past week, and how important it is to see that there was that parliamentary oversight given to the Magnitsky regime sanctions regime here in Canada, and the fact that Parliament could in fact trigger that, and that there would have to be a reporting mechanism to this place, and to ensure that there's that accountability to our democratic infrastructure. And the reason why I believe that's important, Madam Speaker, and let me highlight a few examples of why this is important, is because we have seen an increasing disconnect between the executive government in our nation and Parliament. And that is incredibly concerning for a whole host of reasons, but it's very, very directly applies to what we're talking about here today. So Bill C-281, and one of its four parts specifically addresses that, making sure that that accountability comes back to the People's House here in the House of Commons, that there's that reporting mechanism that exists. But further, we see a disconnect, and I won't get into the myriad of examples outside of this issue where we have seen an Americanization of the separation between the executive and legislative branches of Parliament. And Madam Speaker, that is very, very concerning. That's not how our system is meant to operate. Our Prime Minister sits in the House of Commons. Our cabinet ministers in this country are members of the House of Commons. And it is absolutely key that there be that close connection between executive government and the legislative branch of how our government functions. And when there is that separation, we see, in fact, many of the issues that Canadians are facing, and that the scandals and the erosion of trust in our institutions and whatnot, I believe can be pointed back to the fact that we have a government that refuses to acknowledge the will that is expressed by the people in the House of Commons. And that is no more, cannot be highlighted any more clearly than when it comes to the issue of the IRGC. And now, Madam Speaker, Parliament, and what is unique about Westminster democracy is that it is Parliament. This is the chief arbiter of the nation. Parliamentary supremacy, these principles are absolutely key to how we do business in this country. Yet we have increasingly, the Liberals take that as for granted, the fact that they may have confidence on financial measures and whatnot. But when it comes to actually addressing issues, and of course we see that with the fact that the Liberals reject the will of Parliament and by nature the will of the people when it comes to calling a public inquiry into foreign election interference. But Madam Speaker, we also saw that very troublingly when it comes to the issue of the IRGC. It was this House that voted in favor of listing the IRGC as a terrorist entity. Now, Madam Speaker, this House voted in favor of that. And yet, and it was multiple times. Yet, it's dumbfounding, quite frankly, the fact that the government would refuse to take that action when the people of this country, by nature of this institution, the House of Commons, the keystone of democratic involvement in our country, has said that that should in fact be the case. Now they've tried to explain that away, but Madam Speaker, it's that disconnect that exists. It may be inconvenient to the political whims of the government on a whole host of issues, but Madam Speaker, we need to get back to the roots of why this place exists. So, Madam Speaker, in the minute that I have remaining, I've highlighted some of the challenges, but let me just finish by highlighting one challenge that I think bears significant attention. And that is the fact that we have an increasingly unstable circumstance when it comes to the situation in Asia with China and some of the gestures that are being made towards Taiwan, when it comes to as I mentioned before, the issues with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and there's a whole host of other issues. So, Madam Speaker, it behooves all of us to make sure that we get this right, because ensuring that Canada is not a place where international war criminals or those who have profited from war crimes and the worst possible actions, Canada cannot be a place where those individuals can come for safe haven. So, Madam Speaker, I support this bill. It takes a small step in the right direction, although there's certainly much more work that needs to be done.
It's the honourable member for, Langley Aldergrove.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'd like to thank my colleague for his well thought out speech. We're talking about economic sanctions against people who are essentially terrorists. And of course, the intention of that is to inflict financial and economic pain on them. And if the whole Western world comes together on that, can have a very positive effect. But unfortunately, on the other hand, we're still doing business with Russia. Our Prime Minister was asked if he could do something to facilitate the sale of liquid natural gas to Germany, and he told the German Chancellor, no, we don't see a business case for that. So Germany is still doing business with Russia, and in that way, Russia is able to finance their war against Ukraine. I wonder if the member could comment on that.
Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That's a great question, and one that strikes close to home, especially representing what is the beating heart of Canada's oil and gas sector, the beating heart of Canada's energy industry. It is shameful that a country that has the capacity and the resources to supply not only our domestic needs, but the world with the clean, reliable energy that is required to displace that dictator and despot oil, dictator and despot LNG, like that which is financing Russia's war machine. We have the potential to do that. Madam Speaker, I think the only person that doesn't see a business case for Canadian LNG is the Prime Minister and his activist friends in the Liberal cabinet, because when it comes to the world, they're desperate for it. Yet that Prime Minister had the audacity to stand beside the German Chancellor, who asked us nicely for our resources to facilitate the export of our resources to be imported to Germany, yet our Prime Minister said no. Madam Speaker, that is a stain on our country's ability to address. Now, when it comes to sanctions generally, the reason why sanctions are effective is because it gets at the heart of the money to strike down some of the economic infrastructure that allows these regimes, these individuals, these organizations to carry out their duties. So, Madam Speaker, sanctions are important, but we also need to make sure that we are doing everything we can to get our resources to market so that we can displace that dictator crude.
And comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I really appreciated my colleague's speech. And, you know, I think when we look at Canada's place in the world, and the member touched on it briefly in regards to our natural resources and what that means for, you know, in a sense, public safety here in Canada. We look at where resources are coming from and where some of the people are escaping from, and yet we're buying and importing resources from countries where people are trying to come to Canada to escape it, but yet we're indirectly and sometimes directly supporting the very regimes that they're trying to escape from. I'm just wondering if my colleague has any further comments on that.
Yeah, member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and my colleague is absolutely right. We need to be using every tool at our disposal to make sure that Canada stands up for that peace, freedom and democracy that we have been known to. You know, I think back to where it was seen that Canada became a nation on the battles that we fought in France during the First World War. The bravery of our soldiers during the Second World War, peacekeeping missions that we have participated in. So, Madam Speaker, we have a role to play in the world. It's unfortunate that we've seen a diminished role that Canada's been playing under the leadership of that Prime Minister, but we need to absolutely assert our place as that voice of principle in the world stage. And, Madam Speaker, specifically, I would just reference that when it was reported in the National Post that a ex-Tehran police chief linked to rights abuses spotted working out at a Toronto area gym. Madam Speaker, that's a headline from a newspaper in our country. The fact that we have seen examples where these individuals that have been linked with significant human rights abuses are being given safe haven and the ability to prosper, enjoy the rights and freedoms that we have, when they have taken away the rights and freedoms and lives of so many in in regimes around the world. Madam Speaker, Canada has to do better. And I believe that the conservative vision that is being laid out here by the member from Carleton is that clear vision that not only Canada needs, but that I truly believe the world needs.